Welcome everyone to our second class on training in tenderness, Seva, and the radical openness of the heart that can change the world. I'll tell you why we're doing this. I don't know if I said it last time, but somehow a copy of this book came my way, and it just struck me looking through it, just the beauty of it in terms of the simplicity that very often that stands in contrast to when we're practicing the Buddhist path. There's very often the notion that we're engaging in something incredibly profound and mysterious and deep, which of course hopefully we are, but there's also the sense of it sometimes being something that requires tremendous cerebral exercise. And what this book offers us is really a clear message on the value of something that is entirely non-conceptual, which is just this open, kind heart that we all, like we looked at last time, that we all have experienced. We've all received this from various places. Rinpoche mentions our parents, and particularly our mother. And of course, many of us, we've grown up in a culture where to things in our childhood and so forth. And of course, that might be the case, but certainly we have an idea of what a mother offers. And we have an idea what this tenderness is. And also, this is something that we would want to impart on our children or our friends. And it's something that's immediate and very vividly present within our world. It's this unreserved goodness that we experience all the time. It's everywhere. We might be embittered and somewhat cut off and angry possibly, but when we soften, we discover this, and we discover this not as a state necessarily, but rather as a truth. It's a truth that runs through all the conditions of well-being in our world. We could say Buddha nature manifests through Dzigar. We are going to see how Buddha nature and wisdom and Dzigar, they're all inseparable really. But in the midst of our confusion and our uptightness, our nervousness and so forth, there is this light that's there. And this is something that, of course, yes, on the Buddhist path, we are cultivating something, and we're essentially unraveling our confusion to allow this natural disposition to take place. But in our path, we very often go through some analysis, and we have some discipline that needs to be applied and so forth, where we sometimes get caught on the method, and we somehow lose track of that simplicity and innate goodness that's within us and that's within the others, and that's basic to the whole path. So I hope this this work here sort of reinvigorates our sort of appreciation for that incredibly vivid spirit that really lies at the core of what we're doing on the path to awakening. Okay, so we're presently then on chapter 2. The tender heart is a seed. And of course, this, what I was just saying, also plays into what we're looking at here, which is this quote from Chandrakirti's Madhyamika. This is the second verse in chapter 1, where it says, this is according to the Padmakara translation, and in the actual translation, they put compassion up in the top line where it says, "Of Buddhahood's abundant crop, compassion is the seed." But I went and looked at the Tibetan, and the Tibetan actually has ninje. No, sorry, it has Dzigar, tsini, sapan something, but the word is Dzigar. It's literally Dzigar. And then in the last line, then when it says I celebrate compassion, then the Tibetan has Nyingje. So it's interesting that actually this, what Rinpoche here is addressing here in terms of the key role of Tsewa as it sort of exists in the Madhyamika Avatara. It is actually what it is actually what the Tibetan says. Anyway, that's probably not your concern, more mine. But anyway, this is the second verse in the Madhyamika Avatara, which in the Padmakara translation is known as Introduction to the Middle Way. Very important reading. Now it says, of Buddhahood's crop, Tsewa is the seed. It is like the moisture bringing increase, and it is said to ripen in the state of lasting happiness. Therefore, to begin, I celebrate compassion. Now, as Rinpoche points out, the Madhyamika Avatara is a treatise, and it's a very sophisticated critique of philosophy. It's a very sophisticated treatise of the ignorance that constructs all our attempts to pigeonhole reality. So it's very sophisticated, and is also seen as a commentary on Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika, which is essentially a treatise on the wisdom that sees through conceptual constructions. So as you can imagine, it's a very dense work. And what Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna, they do is they apply reasoning to dismantle our assumptions around the solidity and that exists in terms of our understanding of ourselves innately, and also the solidity that we fabricate with philosophy and dogma and all these, you could say, conceptual systems that try to pigeonhole and nail down reality. And the point of both Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna is that reality cannot be pigeonholed, cannot be understood in terms of language and ideas. It's beyond that. And so it uses some very sophisticated reasoning, very sharp, in some way very intuitive and immediate, but very, very sharp. And essentially to dismantle these, you could say, artificial conceptual constructs that we have on the basis of our ignorance, and also what we in human societies construct with our philosophies and ideas. But you see, that obviously is very demanding intellectually. And it's interesting that while there are 10 chapters or 11 chapters in this work, and they basically are chapters that are about the paramitas, but it's only in the 6th chapter, chapter 6, that actually we engage in the reasoning. Up to there, we talk about the first 5 paramitas, which are really seen then as the skillful means to enable us to have this realization. And there we begin with the first, which is then the praising all the qualities of compassion and this tsewa, this tenderness, as fundamental to what we're doing. So it's interesting that we're not seeing enlightenment as contingent on just our, you could say, intelligence or our reasoning or whatever. We first need to have the fundamentals down, which is really this tenderness. And this tenderness is not just sort of a thing for beginners. It's what's there. It lies as the core of our being. Like I was saying before, it's what resonates with us in every context, in all sorts of places, as the most fundamental and beauty quality of our existence. And so it's something that if we didn't have that within ourselves, we wouldn't be able to recognize it. So it is something that lies within us as the deepest truth within us, but it's dormant. It's something that lies there as a seed. And so what Chandrakirti and Rinpoche is onto is that while it is there as seed, it requires moisture, but it's also there where tsewa and compassion is what actually brings it about. So we need to cultivate this compassion, this tsewa. And it's also that which manifests as the fruition. If we look at what's the outcome of Buddhahood, well, it's benefiting all sentient beings. It's caring for all sentient life more than our only children. So that's where this quality of tenderness and tsewa is something that runs as a red thread through all the aspects of the teaching. So also there we can say this is why the Dharma is good in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. Begins with love. It's a path of love, and it results in love or tenderness. Of course, Rinpoche, aware of the connotations that love sometimes can have, does the skillful choice of using the word tsewa. But tsewa is there at the beginning, it's there in the middle, it's there at the end. So in the previous chapter, we saw how then we have grown up surrounded by tsewa. And even if we haven't, it's something that we recognize universally, and it's something that we wish to give also to others. It's something that has nourished us, and it's something that also we pass on to others. And it's really the essential nature of the universe. We could say, yes, we could go all out and say the nature of the universe is tsewa, the nature of the universe is compassion or love, because that's what it is when it's not held back by this obscuration of the deluded belief in a self. And that's what we're trying to dismantle, but we do so connecting with this innate disposition. So it's really basic to us, and it's really our life force. Dzigar Kongtrul then says, not only has tsewa enabled us to survive, it has enabled the entire human race, as well as all the animal species in this world to survive. The power of tsewa is at the heart of life's creation process. It is at the heart of Mother Nature herself. Okay. So then Rinpoche, he gives the example of the sea turtle, where the point really is that everywhere we look in Mother Nature, we see tenderness, and particularly we see it then with the relationship between parents and particularly mothers and their young. So even snakes look after their young. Sea turtles, apparently, and I didn't know that, they actually leave the eggs and then go back to sea. So you might think, well, the sea turtles, they don't have that kind of tsewa, but that's not true. And Rinpoche points out they actually will swim thousands of kilometers to find just the right beach and just the right conditions, and then being very careful with laying their eggs. If something goes wrong, they start over again, but they really make sure that the eggs have the optimal conditions, and it's only then that they leave, having ensured that the young ones are in the good place. So we might think, well, snakes, sea turtles, and so on don't have it, but it's everywhere. And this is again what's so wonderful about this book. Actually, it points to something that's so immediate and so simple. You could say the whole point of this book is that we begin to be aware of this tsewa. Of course, we tend very often, as critically thinking individuals, we tend to look at all the troubles there are. And of course, yes, these need to be met and addressed, but also we should really be attentive to how much goodness there is. Dzigar Kongtrul says, tsewa can take many outward forms. Some of them may seem unfamiliar, but in essence, there is always the same quality of naturally flowing tenderness. So this also in our human cultures, we can see we're so different in the different cultures, how we express our tenderness, In some cultures, it's very restrained, right? Is it, was it here? Somebody else that was talking about how in Chinese, there's not really love in the sense that we ordinarily understand it in the modern world. And it's not something that, a friend of mine was telling me this, this sort of whole notion of love in traditional Chinese cultures, apparently, the way that is now constructed or it is constructed in the modern context in the West and so on, something that actually wasn't there, even the term, not necessarily present within the Chinese culture. But that's just with regards to how, in relation to the meeting with, you could say, Western modernity. But of course, that's the thing, it would be there. It's not as if love wouldn't be there, but it would just not be necessarily expressed in the same way, in some cultures, you never end a conversation with your children without saying, I love you, and in some other cultures, it would be completely unthinkable to end the conversations with that. So it's just across all the various races and all the cultures and all the different sort of species, this Tsewa expresses itself so differently. Now, this Tsewa that we're cultivating here, we do it in the Buddhist context in conjunction with compassion. Now, compassion is something that, again, it's a bit more than love, because it usually extends beyond just, a significant few. It's really this, and essentially in the Buddhist context, all across the various traditions, we define compassion as the wish for others. It's to wish others to be free of suffering and its causes. We have prayers like that and so on, but that's essentially what it is. You can juxtapose it to loving kindness, which is the wish for others to have happiness and its causes. But compassion is attending to their suffering and just wishing them to be free of suffering. And that's why Rinpoche gives the example of, we might, for example, we might develop this for others. We might have this awareness that how others suffer. We might, for example, and this is also a traditional way of, if you read Words on My Perfect Teacher by Paltra Rinpoche, we're taught how to meditate on compassion, thinking about animals that are being led to the slaughter, and really sort of trying to empathize and identify with what they're going through. On the basis of that, then, we could then develop a caring for others. And if we, for example, are strong animal lovers, we might become vegetarian, and we might be people who fight for the rights of animals and so forth. And this is really good. This is where we become aware and concerned about others. We might not always be able to do everything for them, as Rinpoche says, but there's some sense of responsibility and wishing to do something for them. We might donate to charities, we might be vegetarian, etc., vegan, and so on. And regardless of what actually we're doing, the basic thing is we're developing this care and this concern. It's something that bugs us. It's something that we are onto. And that is something that also transforms us. We begin to become more sensitive to others. We begin to become aware of how we're interacting with others, our behavior, and so on. So that's where, as we're just beginning to identify how others suffer, it also diminishes our self-centering, our selfishness. And also what happens is then our sort of self-centered concern for, am I happy or not, and so forth, am I fulfilled, all of a sudden it sort of recedes into the background. It's more about the plight of others that really becomes our key concern. So Rinpoche says, furthermore, our own suffering no longer seems as exceptional as it once did. We realize that all sentient beings are in the same boat. Some are going through much more suffering than others, but all of us are vulnerable. Now, we could have compassion when we're, you could say, doing the politically correct thing. We're being moralistic. We have this sense of, I am doing the right thing. We could even become quite embittered and moralistic, and our compassion could end up becoming rather militant. You have that sometimes, with And of course, if it's really imbued with love, that's fine. Then we shouldn't, of course, hesitate. But it takes us out when we have real compassion that's imbued with seva, not just, you could say, compassion as a political position, not just as a moralistic imperative. Then it's so much more. It becomes something where we're not concerned about us in the equation. You know, many of us, we chant a dedication in the Mahayana context where we would say, may I dedicate free from subject, object, and action, or we would say free of the threefold concepts or whatever. But that is where, when there's genuine seva, it becomes much more than just me and my cause. And also that's where compassion is not just that we're being moralistic persons and we're burdened by this, you know, that we engage in what's right, caring about the others, but it's something that weighs us down. That's where it very often is not that sort of heartfelt, warm, driven by love, but rather just conceptual, artificial. It could even become drudgery. And that's where Dzigar Kongtrul points out that without seva, then compassion could very well become this rather dry, moralistic style of compassion. And he says, if we look at sages, those who are free, they're not dreary. And Rinpoche then refers to his own teachers as living examples. And he mentions His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who works tirelessly and who's gone through so much tragedy and continually is confronted with the horrors that has happened within his own lifetime and what he has experienced. And yet he's never weighed down by this by his dedication to others. There's this continual joy. And Rinpoche also mentions his other teachers, Tugu Uchen Rinpoche, Kyabje Digu Chenze Rinpoche, Nyushu Ken Rinpoche, and Kyabje Trutrik Rinpoche. And incidentally, these are also my teachers, and I can sort of second Rinpoche's testimony to that these great beings are not dreary. We still have His Holiness Dalai Lama with us. The others have passed, but I can second and join in testifying that indeed these were persons that were sparkling with brilliance and caring. The most vivid quality would be love, would be the joy, and also their wisdom, not being deceived. Their profound intelligence, but not cerebral intelligence, but just really deep insight. But that insight so free from, you could say, a personal position, but rather just coming from a place of wishing to engage with the world with love and wishing others well. So these marvelous individuals, imbued as they are with compassion, it's not the compassion that's moralistic, but very much one that's driven by tenderness, love. So with seva, compassion is joyful. So when we have this, then we're also not afraid to connect with and feel and share in others' suffering. Sometimes when we encounter others' suffering, we're not quite sure how to actually deal with that, and it might be too much. We might not be able to completely, you could say, meet the others, and we have alienation and fear and discomfort and so forth. And when we have seva, these kind of self-conscious concerns fall away, and also we engage with others. We feel their suffering, and we're not afraid of being part of what's happening with them. And so that's where the bodhisattva is somebody who's willing to have a completely raw, unreserved, and direct encounter with the suffering of others. And this comes from being very connected, and that connectedness of seva, and with it the heartache, the raw quality, the pain, and so forth, it comes from a place of being very real. So it has this nature of being this unconditional joy. Not in the joy in the sense of joy of sort of healing over laughing, but in the joy in the sense of just confidence in the goodness that's present within all the conditions of whatever unfolds. And so Dzigar Kongtrul just says, sometimes our tenderness makes us feel elated. Other times it brings us heartache. But even in heartache, we can experience deep bliss, the bliss of a heart that is open, connected, and thriving in its natural element of Tsewa. So once we have the taste of Tsewa, we are fearless. We don't shut our heart. And we actually have bliss. We actually have found out what's real, and we're not deceived into secondary sort of cheap thrills that we might have. Of course, we might enjoy these sort of the ordinary thrills and the ordinary pleasures of, you could say, life, but we're not really dependent on it. We're not really hankering for it. We know what's real, and that's where the essential quality of Tsewa, which is this confidence of unconditional caring and love and so forth, that leaves us without any sort of hankering for ordinary comfort and pleasure. And Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche, he would say, this sort of, what would the Dalai Lama do? It's sort of line of thinking. He says, he thinks about the Dalai Lama, what would he prefer, receiving a shiatsu massage or giving a teaching? And he probably would prefer giving a teaching, even though, of course, he would enjoy the shiatsu massage. Then he's more concerned, really, Rinpoche says, expressing his tsewa in the sense of he's more just concerned about giving. So that's really where it's at, so to speak. So that's about compassion. There's also another aspect of tsewa, and which something that we stress so much in the Buddhist teaching, which is the other. First, we've just looked at compassion, karuna, ninje. Then we have loving kindness, which is karuna or chamba, and that's the other one. While compassion is the wish that others be free from suffering and its causes, then loving kindness is the wish that others have happiness and its causes. And how we cultivate that is actually realizing how all of us, we want to be happy. And let's not fool ourselves. If you read Matthew Ricard's, what is it, The Art of Happiness book, right? He'll talk about how the French existentialist left bank culture will sort of regard something like, what's the purpose of life? And he would he was describing how they sort of balked at the idea of, should the purpose of life be happiness? That would be too bland, too boring, and whatever, And this is not just the French, by the way. The Danes join into all the Scandinavians, and everywhere in the sort of modern intellectual world, there's this kind of sense that, oh yeah, we want happiness. No, that would be too boring. We want pain, But you see, even that hankering for pain, that's just another way of saying it. You might, well, you might want to have all sorts of complications and dramas and so forth, and we sort of go towards it, but strangely enough, it's driven by some strange urge that drives us towards what makes us feel fulfilled. So it's still wanting happiness, and so we have to just let's call a spade a spade. We all want happiness, however we might want to construct it, and even if it's existing within great angst, then that's actually also we're wanting that. And on a very ordinary level, we just, there's things that will make us so happy, and we all share that. There's every movement actually, and Rinpoche will make that point about us being sentient beings. Every movement is actually, every micro moment is driven by a wanting of happiness. But as much as we want happiness, well, so do the others. And that's where we could begin to identify with what it is that others want. And that's where we would see our just fixating on our own happiness is unreasonable, because it's very insular and narrow-minded to just ignore the aspirations of others, which are just like our own. Of course, we fixate on our own happiness because we have that habit. But this is also something that we can turn around. This is just the way we've hardwired ourselves on the basis of our particular conceptual and emotional patterning. And this is something that we can shift. So again, this is where we need to be clear that wishing others to be happy, that's one thing. And it could be something that we do. We might, unfortunately, and this is also so much part of, well, let's not blame it all on modernity, but somehow in the disciplines of psychology and Western, you could say, cultural praxis, very often we think of in terms of what should we do, we think in terms of behaviorism. Is this what I should be doing? We ask ourselves. That's just a small part of it. It's what's behind. And so, for example, loving kindness, yes, should I be loving kind to so and so? Thinking, should I do this? It's not about doing. And that's where sometimes our gestures of loving kindness and so forth, they're really just superficial gestures of action. And that's where we might also even be in a particular way. We might even be sort of charming and ingratiating and sort of exuding loving kindness. But unless there's this sewa behind, which is this genuine caring, then these gestures might just remain superficial. And when we sometimes engage with loving kindness, it might be that we actually have some expectations. We have some selfish agenda behind it. We might say, I love you, but we might be waiting for the other party to come back, I love you too, or something like that. And that's where we engage with expectations. And that can actually be very frustrating. We could practice perhaps a path of loving kindness and so on, and then maybe it's not giving us what we want. So our expectations aren't met. So that's where the tsewa, the element that we're talking about here, is really something that lies beyond just the ordinary sort of agendas of our self. It's much bigger. Dzigar Kongtrul just says, when our loving kindness comes from tsewa, on the other hand, we have the joy of feeling that another's happiness is our happiness. Instead of letting ourselves get entangled in so many ideas and neurotic expectations, we rely on the simple non-conceptual energy that flows from our warm, open heart. Sometimes our kind actions benefit the other actions, and sometimes they don't. But our love never turns sour because we're disappointed in the result. So, also as parents, we might do things for our kids, and maybe it all goes south and it doesn't work out. But we know that this came from a pure place of just wishing it to go well, and likewise for our friends and others. We never give up on love. Actually, a little bit of an aside, but a friend of mine, actually, this is the Reverend Surya Das. And Surya Das studied with Neem Karoli Baba, along with, Ram Das and Bhagavan Das and all these Das people. And Neem Karoli Baba said something which I have also always carried with me, actually. The line of transmission coming from Surya is that Neem Karoli Baba said, never throw somebody out of your heart. And that's significant. We never give up on people. We never throw them out of our hearts. We might be tempted and resentful, but we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't do it. So, drawing on the Hindu tradition of Neem Karoli Baba, never throw anyone out of your heart. With sewa, our loving kindness is sincere, like a mother's love. So, we can trust a mother's love comes from a very pure place. When a mother says, I'm really caring about my child, it's not rubbish, it's not bullshit, it's true. They really mean that. And similarly also, what we'd want to do is actually extend this to all sentient beings. Of course, the love of a mother is significant, but it's really just indicative of what we'd want to really, really do with our minds. And that's where we'd want to extend this for our own and for everybody's sake. Like Chandrakirti says, it's the seed, it's also the water. And so this is something that we extend to all sentient beings, recognizing that all sentient beings, we're connected with them. And there's no end to the needs and the wishes of sentient beings. So there's also no end to what we would do for them. So that's where the Bodhisattva vision comes into play as something that is vast. So we wish all beings to have everything they want. And yet we also know that even if sentient beings get everything that they would ever want, they're not going to be happy. We would want them on a very simple level and on the basis of tsewa. We want them to be happy. But we also know, we also know that just happiness is so compounded. Very often it's about, getting what you want, the subject and object meeting, right? And so that's where ordinary happiness is temporary and conditional. And Dzigar Kongtrul gives this example of a mother who's wanting to give her child a present, and she has a choice between giving something that's sort of a little bit sort of has a bit of bling and a bit of sort of superficial appeal, and giving the child something that really has enduring value, something that gives sort of continues to give something wholesome pleasure. So so that's where the Bodhisattva is concerned with more than just, the Bodhisattva is concerned with giving temporary unconditional happiness, yes, but also more than that, and realizing that it's only when the causes of suffering altogether are eliminated through the removing of all obscurations that genuine happiness and freedom ends suffering. So only with enlightenment is happiness and freedom from suffering lasting. Yeah, I hope you get that sentence. It's it is actually, I think it does make sense in English, but a little bit awkward. Anyway, yes, it's only with enlightenment that we really have lasting freedom from suffering, lasting happiness. As a mother wishing permanent happiness for her child, we wish that for all beings. Dzigar Kongtrul says, how many are completely free from painful emotions such as aggression and attachment? How many have gone beyond all hopes and fears, including the fear of death? How many have achieved a supreme level of happiness that can't be diminished by any circumstances? If a mother knew that her child could have this kind of happiness, wouldn't that be her greatest wish for her child? What reason could she have to aim for anything less? And that's, of course, where the scope of the Bodhisattva is so vast. There's, on one hand, there's the love, and there's also the wisdom that really knows what's going to be ultimately benefiting and what's going to ultimately set others free. So that's where the Bodhisattvas they operate both with this desire for establishing beings in temporary happiness, and also knowing that this temporary happiness, it's very good, but ultimately it's only with enlightenment that sentient beings will be free. So this enlightenment, which of course is something that in our culture is, it's not really understood. It's understood as some sort of Buddhist concept, some sort of foreign concept, but it's not something that's part of the ordinary phenomenology of our, you could say, our worldview. And so that's where in the modern world, this idea of complete awakening, perfect freedom, is essentially unknown. It's nevertheless something that if we, taking the, you could say, cue from the Buddhist teaching and from what the Buddha teaches and from what the sages and the living lineage and so on are communicating, there is this potential. Our confusion can be eliminated. So that's where we're understanding that this potential is something that's there universally. And it's actually, of course, if we look at ourselves and we look at our confusion, our afflictions, we might sort of see this, what is again the selfish gene. We might see ourselves in terms of the lowest common denominator, just as being egotistical, selfish, and that's very often how we've been sort of, you could say, brainwashed and conditioned, and that's where we fall back on a sort of a disillusionment about the, you could say, the human race or all beings and so forth. There might be a doubt that there's a core of enlightenment everywhere, but that is where, if we look looking at ourselves, and this is, you could say, empirical in terms of what we can assess, we can see that our confusion, our suffering is not something that's absolute. They come and they go, and we can actually work with the conditions. For example, here we're talking a lot about the open heart of Dzigar, opening and closing the heart, and what that has as an impact in terms of how we experience our lives and our interaction with others. So we can see that sentient beings, they always operate from a wish to be happy, and that itself is indicative of there is some underlying wish that recognizes that they could be happy, that they're not stuck in being in this one way in terms of being confused and suffering. So there is a deep intelligence, and this we can intuitively appreciate in others, in ourselves, and so forth. And Rinpoche makes a point that every action actually that sentient beings have, and the Tibetan word is draw, meaning that we're always moving. Every action is actually motivated by wishing happiness. That, if nowadays we talk about, computers and artificial intelligence, do you think that artificial intelligence and computers have a wish for happiness? They might have programming that enables them to function optimally, and they might have algorithms that program them to operate in a particular, you could say, direction, optimal, you could say, efficacy in their particular field, but it's nothing to do with this wishing happiness. I have to personally say I don't have a lot of patience for that whole discussion around artificial intelligence as superseding human intelligence, or sentient intelligence, because for this very point, there's not that Buddha nature, there's not that underlying, you could say, aversion to suffering and experience, the felt experience of happiness. So that is what sets us apart from being inanimate. And it signals that we have this pure nature. It's on the basis of that we can rejoice when we see the beauty in others' actions, or the beauties in others' clarity or goodness or selflessness. So that's where we understand that this quality of awakening is something universally present within all beings, and yet failing to connect with this and properly engage with it, then sentient beings suffer. So that's where the Bodhisattva and ourselves also at presently then aspiring in that direction, being Bodhisattvas in the making, we aspire for that. That is our ultimate wish, really, that all beings may be free, may they have enlightenment. So how can we then effectively achieve this? Achieving this goal requires we ourselves achieve enlightenment. And it's only then that we can actually really benefit others fully. Until then, yes, we can do a lot of patchwork and we can perhaps put someone on the path and so on, but it's only with complete enlightenment that we can really fully serve others. And it's also when we have that we actually really begin to fully understand what sewa is, what love really is. So this wish to guide others to such freedom, and this is also how it's defined by Shantideva in the way of the Bodhisattva, it is the wish that all beings be established in enlightenment. And that is the mindset of the Bodhisattva. Rinpoche says, those who live by bodhicitta, who devote their time, energy, and passion to this altruistic quest, are known as bodhisattvas. As soon as we orient our own hearts in this way, we too start to become bodhisattvas. Even with all our present neurosis and confusion, we are eligible to walk on the bodhisattva path. The only qualification is having the seed of Dzigar. So that is where we could very well take the vow of the Bodhisattva even though we don't have it. So this is really a significant sort of a significant statement about what we want to be doing on the spiritual path. It will never be about retreating into sort of a cosmic comfort zone, but it will be about sewa. It will be about dedication to others. And so the outcome of this path is the fruition of Buddhahood. And this fruition of Buddhahood, we think of the Buddha Shakyamuni 2,500 years ago, who after his extraordinary life and also his extraordinary previous lives attained perfect enlightenment. I think, how could we ever do that? But in fact, the Buddhas, like Buddha Shakyamuni, they began where we were, and it's on the basis of simply just creating the causes and conditions that they attained enlightenment. And this path then begins with Tsewa. There's actually a story of, and this also you would have read in the words of my perfect teacher, that we would say we talk about the Buddha's previous lives, like you have them enumerated in the Jataka tales, and it's said that the first life in which the first life as a bodhisattva came about when the Buddha was in hell, reborn in hell, and together with someone else was undertaking this incredibly tough job while somebody was just whipping them, and they were both just straining and pursuing this job, like pulling a plow or something like that. And at one point, the Buddha had this thought, that the other guy he was working with, he could take a break because it wasn't going to change. It's not as if they're both going to suffer. So he said to the other guy, "You take a break, and I'll just carry on here on my own. Go have a break." And that's where immediately the Buddha was out of hell. The Bodhisattva was out of hell. In fact, he wasn't a Bodhisattva then, but that's the moment he became a Bodhisattva. So that's where Tsewa and the path to, that's where Tsewa is what sparks the path to enlightenment. That's where the Bodhisattva career begins. So then, and this is actually going to the very first verse of the first chapter in the Madhyamika there, and the Rinpoche is translating it here, Chandrakirti's praise of this. And he says, Chandrakirti says, Buddhas come from bodhisattvas, bodhisattvas come from bodhicitta, and bodhicitta comes from Tsewa. So there we have it. There's no questions. You're actually welcome to type in questions if you have any at any given time. I usually stop halfway. Usually. But there's no questions, so I'm just going to keep going. Yeah. So, chapter 3, the tender heart is water. So, those who recognize the value of Tsewa are very fortunate. So that's us. We are very fortunate. Dzigar Kongtrul says, although all sentient beings are endowed with the tender heart of Tsewa, very few are fortunate enough to realize how significant that is. How common is it for people to recognize their own tender heart as a seed that can grow into the tree of enlightenment? How common is it even for people to tap into their warm heart and realize how much better they feel when it is open than when it is closed? Even this simple observation is rare. Most of the time, the seed remains a seed. So we have this potential, but that's it. We just leave the potential as potential. This is not so good. Now, presently then, we just say that those who recognize its value, that they're very, very fortunate, but recognizing this does not make us superior. But we're onto something. We have reason to rejoice. Dzigar Kongtrul says, we are in a different position, however, than just leaving it as a potential, right? We're in a different position, however. This is not because we're intrinsically superior to others, so we have no reason to be arrogant. But we do have the rare good fortune to have encountered a wisdom tradition that understands what Sewa is and how to make the most of it. So Rinpoche talks about how in the old days, sailors in India, they would go off to sea with the hope of finding this wish-granting gem, and how in fact, everything that we could ever want, the true wish-granting gem. And this is also like Sarah says, when we recognize the nature of mind, this is like finding the wish-granting gem in our own hands. So we have everything within us. We needn't hanker for anything outside. And also what we have is, we actually have the fortune of having an authentic lineage that can provide guidance. And on the basis of this is what's happening right now, right? We're studying with Dzigar Kongtrul, himself a great incarnate bodhisattva who studied with other great bodhisattvas, as we saw. There's an actual lineage that can help us right now discerning and appreciating the value of this sewa. Others wouldn't have that. Everybody has sewa, everybody has good heart, and so on. But actually to highlight the value of this is what's very, very fortunate. Now, it's not enough that we just then recognize it. It's something that, while the water for the seed is sewa, it's not enough to just say, well, it's my tsewa that's going to water my tsewa. Like Rinpoche says, that would just leave us very sort of passive. We actually do need to be proactive in terms of bringing forth the true potential and benefit of this tsewa. So there's work to be done. That's clear. But we have the seed there, and we can actually receive guidance in what to do. So although we have the seed, we need to be proactive in cultivating it. And our connection then to the Dharma and to the teachers enables us to recognize it and to sort of be able to gauge the way forward. We're also, on the basis of that, we're able to see the benefit of engaging Tsewa. And also, and this is not just, as you could say, in theory, but we can also, through our own experience, we can also see the detriment, the sadness or the loss in just leaving it without cultivating it. So we can see that this tsewa is something that's a benefit to everyone, everywhere, all sentient beings. It's something that takes us out of ourselves and into the world, and in a way that we can benefit the world. So we need to pursue its cultivation. So we recognize this, again, leading back to what we looked at before, it's something that provides temporary happiness and ultimate enlightenment. So Rinpoche says, since this seed, if properly cared for, is destined to grow into Buddhahood, it is our duty to cultivate it. If we, who have the knowledge of Tsewa, don't do this, who else will? Therefore, it's our responsibility to make the most of our good fortune and become perfect guides to lead others to enlightenment. Otherwise, we will be letting down humanity. We will be letting down all sentient beings, because all of them need a perfect guide to help them realize their own enlightened nature. So presently, and also Shantideva, he would say this, we really shouldn't be caught up in our ego and just following our ego and our habitual patterns. We're not just letting ourselves down, we're letting everybody down. There's nobody that's going to become enlightened for us. Doesn't help that others are enlightened. We need to do it ourselves, and nobody can just give us the pill or do it for us or whatever. So that's where we understand that we could do something enormous. So this is the motivation that informs our attitude. So we need this water, the water that waters. That we need to water the seed at Sewa, and we do that through this tender heart that recognizes the futility of the habitual pursuit of happiness. We can see how the paths that we pursued in the past and the sort of ignorant actions that just perpetuate themselves is not going to lead anywhere. So we need to have this intention that like we were talking about before, that sees really the value of Tsewa on the basis of also the instructions that we get from the lineage, on the basis of our insight with our own experience, and also then this recognition that if we don't do it, who is going to? So this comes with a lot of wisdom that really sees not just, you could say, the understanding of how things appear to us now, but beginning to actually see through our confusion and see beyond our ordinary confused constructs, that enables us to more and more understand really the ramifications of Tsewa. So this wisdom, it's something that comes about through us gradually eliminating confusion through reasoning, through hearing the teaching, to contemplating the teaching, and then also personal experience through meditating and integrating our experience of meditation in everyday life. So in doing this, we invoke the presence and know-how of the lineage. We are fortunate we can draw on the insights of others. And once we proceed along this, then this process provides unshakable confidence in Tsewa. Sorry. Kongtrul just says, we have to observe our heart over and over again, both when it's open and when it's closed. We have to contrast the experience of Tsewa with the experience of being absorbed in our small self. We have to attend to and contemplate our tender heart until we value it as the enlightened ones do, until we value Tsewa above all other things. This is where we could say at this point, our mind becomes a bit like a laboratory, where we actually take in, we say, hey, what's happening with my mind when I'm in this way, and what happens when my mind when I do that way? And we actually contrast the two. So this is where we need to, and we don't particularly even need to sort of, do it that consciously, because it happens all the time. You could say, habitually retreat into a small self, and sometimes we actually step out of our habitual patterns, and we have all the benefits that come from that. And that's why we can see when we actually give tenderness, there's such a vast difference from when we're absorbed in a small self that just wants tenderness and demands and so forth. So this is where we really begin to appreciate the value of this in terms of just setting us free. Okay, there's a very long question here. Okay, I'm going to take that at the end, okay? Yeah. Yeah, I'll take that at the end if that's okay. Yeah. Habituating ourselves to the intention of Tsewa, our path becomes smoother. See, once Tsewa might actually seem like difficult, and it's actually good if Tsewa is difficult. It means that we're actually onto it. It's something that takes us out of our comfort zone. But the thing is, it also becomes easier. And the thing is also, once we have Tsewa, once there's kindness, then also our path becomes smoother. There's very often a sad tendency, particularly among Western intellectuals, where there's a notion of, oh, if I become enlightened, then everything's fine. If I just recognize the nature of mind, everything's fine. There must be shortcuts. But it's actually, that's just the ordinary habitual mind that just wants the convenience of a shortcut. And that's where the real progress comes when there's actually kindness, when we're kind to others. We're not particularly Buddhist, we're not particularly one way or another, we're just kind individuals. And we actually work with that. Then that's where really enlightenment begins to take place. So kindness, tsewa, tenderness, that's where everything actually becomes the genuine path. We want Sewa to become essential in everything that we are and that we do. Of course, it's already there, but we want to have it as something that informs our attitudes, our actions at all times. It's where we can begin to trust ourselves as individuals that possess Sewa, and on the basis of that, then our actions also express Sewa. So, of course, the obstacles, what holds us back, is that we sometimes have confusions. We might all of a sudden fall back into having very small-minded, self-centered wants. So that's where again, this is not about just behavior, it's about what's behind the attitudes and the intentions. So this is where we need to be clear on what our intention is. What is it that's behind our actions? So we need to be conscious. And that's where we're going to look at that. We need this thing called vigilant introspection, that we have awareness of what's what, that we know what's of value, what we need to do, and how we're actually going about it. So that's where we need to be. And also, if we're, for example, practitioners, we very often will say, as we begin sadhana, the first thing we do is we say we arouse bodhicitta. We develop the enlightened motivation. So keeping our heart open, which is really what this is about, is, of course, easier for some. Others, they need to go through a process. For some, it's like intuitive. It's so obvious. But others, they need to actually understand why, and they need to train. And also sometimes, we combine the two. Dzigar Kongtrul says, this referring some than for others. Some people quickly grasp the significance of keeping their heart open and allowing Sewa to flow naturally and blissfully. They instinctively trust that Sewa to be the most reliable means of bringing happiness to themselves and others. And it makes intuitive sense to them that their fortunate situation gives them the responsibility to attain enlightenment for the benefit of beings, which is really great. But then again, others will need to actually reason why do this, and actually need to sort of observe what is actually going on. You could say sort of tinker and sort of where we bump our heads against the wall when things don't work, and when we begin to discover what actually does work. But the thing is actually that when we go through that process, some might, you could say, snap into the open heart intuitively, very quickly. Then others might have to actually go through a process of sort of finding their way. But also, if there is then this process, and some will need to apply reasoning and going through their personal experiences, that kind of lengthy process may well provide for more stability. There might be a sense of, not more a sense, but there might actually, with that stability, also be a sense of ownership, to have actually gone through the teaching, tested the teaching, verified the validity of the teaching, and come around to a sense of this really is true. That's where there's then ownership and stability. So whether we're the kind who sort of, you could say, have the instantaneous, you could say, snapping into this open heart, or whether we're some who work with it through a gradual process, Rinpoche urges us to prioritize this sewa. And he says, please direct the potential of your tender heart into bodhicitta, the wish to attain enlightenment, in order to guide others there. If you can set that intention today, wonderful. If you need more time to examine these teachings and your experience, please take the time you need. The point is to arrive at this clear intention, this vision, which will make the rest of the path so much more straightforward. Now, this vision that we have with the path, as we've been talking about here, is based on the tender heart. And just think, when we have that vision and we know where we're heading, we proceed without hesitation. And that really is the water then that nourishes the seed of Tsewa. It enables us to actually engage it. So, of course, that this seed grows depends on this continual application. So we need to have a vision that then directs us in terms of continually applying it. That's the inspiration. We need to draw on the inspiration that we're not alone in this. We have the example of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have gone the path. They started off as ordinary beings like us, and it's on the basis of their application really that they arrived at where they are. Kongtrul, he says we have to remember that there was nothing miraculous about the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and he says the Buddha came out of a I'm always quoting this, so bear with me. The Buddha came out of a factory, not out of a lotus. So of course, don't get all mixed up with the Vajrayana approach, but the point really is that it's going to be things that we are proactively engaging with that will set us free, that will bring us along the path, that will nourish this seed of Tsewa. And this is where this grand vision of bodhicitta is what inspired the Buddhas to pursue the paramita path. The paramita path being the practice of giving, the practice of patience, what is it again? No, Dzigar, he uses some different terms. This is what is it? Giving, and then ethical action, tolerance, prioritizing what's important, and wisdom. Anyway, basically the 6 paramitas that we normally refer to as generosity, discipline, patience, endeavor, concentration, and wisdom. That's the paramita path. It says, and that is, you could say, what we actually pursue on the basis of this attitude of Tsewa. Dzigar says, their warm heart, with its naturally flowing affection for others, was what kept them moving forward through all the stages and challenges of the path over the course of many lifetimes. It prevented them from becoming discouraged, from losing their zeal. Mothers, by their very nature, never give up on the well-being of their children. Similarly, if we clearly establish bodhicitta in our hearts, we will never give up on benefiting sentient beings until every single one has realized their true nature, their own enlightened mind. Okay, I'm just going to take a question. So my father is dying. Yeah, it's interesting. You're not the only one actually in this course for whom this is happening right now. So yes, my father is dying. We aren't sure how much time he has left. There is a love transpiring between us that is so rich and unexpected. It's almost as if his nearness to death has created the conditions for love to arise that wasn't ever really there before. It's hard to describe the pain because I'm not sad or happy. It's just really raw. Is there anything I can do? I've never read Tibetan Book of the Dead and don't know how much else to do at this time other than pray and make offerings. How can I connect to Tsewa without dwelling in attachment so I stay present? Well, I would first of all say that this is where you can actually feel this Tsewa that we're talking about in terms of the open heart. This is a wonderful moment of actually discovering it. And you could say, first of all, appreciate the non-conceptual experience. There's a lot that you can think about, do, and so forth. But above all, appreciate that there is this beautiful quality that's there. And then you could read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but that might just sort of be, it might seem, you could say, external to that whole thing. It might bring in a cerebral dimension. Of course, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is really just instruction on how to set yourself free when you've passed away. And even if the person who receives this instruction hasn't really thought of that possibility, if the person who's reading it has a completely clear, you could say, vision of how this text really instructs in arriving at this simplicity and this luminosity, then it'll work. But for many of us, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, if we read it, honestly, it's going to be pretty odd. talks a lot about deities. It talks about peaceful deities, wrathful deities, and all sorts of things. And of course, what we're talking about here is the same old that we have in the Abhidharma. Basically, the arising of the content of the mind. Like if we study the skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas, we understand how we actually contain all of this, you could say, manifestation in our mind. And what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is telling us is really just to recognize the luminosity of these skandhas, ayatanas, and dhatus. But for us who one might not be familiar with the whole idea of our, Buddha nature in terms of how it manifests in its pure aspect, which is what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is teaching us, it might be a little bit, difficult. So I would say what really is just, I would say it's really just to be there, open. We don't even need to conceptualize it, just to be open. And if you want to do something, I would say Tonglen practice. Because you'd want your father to experience happiness and be free of suffering. So that's where we can do this practice of breathing out our own happiness, giving happiness, and taking whatever suffering that he's going through. So Tonglen practice can be very good also because nobody knows you're doing it. So that's where it could be so helpful. Actually, somebody's saying, and I'm very glad actually. Somebody's reminding me of this book, which you can get. It's called "Living is Dying." You can download it. It's on the web. I can't remember where, but I have it. So if you need the PDF, I can send it to you. It's from Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, and it's essentially it's about perspectives on death, but it's also what we can do when we're with somebody who's dying. So maybe that would be a good thing to have with you as your okay, it's on to Siddhartha's Intent website. Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's a great guide actually in this case. So I would say rejoice that this is happening, and just remaining open with that open heart. That's, I think, what Dzigar Kongtrul is saying. Then someone saying, would it help to further develop our tsewa? Not tsewang. Tsewang is something else. Would it help to further develop our tsewa if we constantly say, I love you to every single being we come across, mentally, of course, so we don't freak them out and kind of fake it till we make it? Yeah, it's whatever works. That's again where we're in you can try that, see how you go. But then again, you might, after some time, might become a bit tedious to, even if we are only doing it mentally, maybe don't do it verbally. But sure, it's one way of actually breaking patterns. So anything like that, yes. And that's why we should feel free in terms of, you could say, taking our mind as a laboratory and experimenting and trying what works. But of course, we are continually, once we break that barrier, then there's more to be done. So it's something we could do for a while, and it's certainly not faking it, because it's actually, no, it's not faking it. It's actually yoga. It's actually connecting with what is intrinsically true to ourselves. So while you could say it's departing from the rigidity of our ordinary mind, it's actually beginning to connect with our genuine mind. And that's where actually anything that we do on the path is never ever really faking it. It's actually just connecting with what is true. But of course, from the conventional point of view, it's not what we ordinarily do. So in that case, it's a departure from the kind of ordinary way that we do things. So I guess some people sometimes talk about faking it till we make it, because we don't really believe we have Buddha nature, but we do. And anything in the Dharma actually connects us with that. So we have been faking it for very long, wandering in delusion, and now we're discontinuing this artificiality. Yeah. Oh yeah, we don't feel love right now. That's right. But it's in there, in us. So that's why you're right. It feels fake for now. That's true. It feels fake. But it's one of these things that that will connect us with what's genuine. Yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Yeah. There's a lot of different skillful means available, you know. But anyway, presently, let's stick to what Rinpoche he's suggesting here. So just beginning just to, you could say, reach the topic and beginning to sort of intuit the truth of what's being said here. That's already the beginning. And then, of course, there's many, many methods. So we'll be touching on more of this in the chapters to come. So for next time, please read then the chapters 4 and 5, removing impediments to Tsewa, the mind in crisis, and opening the injured heart. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you.